Hello, my name is Thomas Pomerico, and I will be giving you a lecture today on what is art. In this lecture, we'll be talking about how you define art, how you categorize art, who gets to make art, who decides when art goes into a museum. We're going to discuss the elements and principles of art. Those are the grammar and vocabulary for reading and analyzing art. And we're going to look at lots and lots of examples. You've probably seen crazy examples in the news of things that you might have not thought were art. And we're going to get into why those things might be considered art, as well as all the traditional things that you probably already assume are art. So this will be our first introductory lecture. I hope you enjoy. Thank you.
What is art? So this is not an easy question to answer. It could be many, many different things. And there's been a lot of artists that have tested this definition over the years. Could be anything from the Mona Lisa to pop art like Warhol's Campbell's soup can, or even the fountain, which is nothing but a urinal turned upside down presented by Marcel Duchamp. Here's some important questions that we should start with. What is art? Where is art? Who makes art? And what is the value of art? Does it hang on a museum or gallery? That's one way that we've discovered what a piece of art is. Is it only a tangible object such as a painting, drawing, or sculpture? Or could it be made out of earth? Or could it be made out of found materials? Or could it be performance? Art is defined in so many different ways. You can probably think of some different ways right now. Who decides what is art and what is the boundary of art? Does the institution decide? Does the curator decide? Does the museum director decide? Does the artists themselves decide? Or does the general public decide? Here are some theories about what art may be. Philosophers have come up with over the years. Significant form, so maybe it expresses some kind of beauty, form of beauty, although beauty is subjective and quickly run into problems with that definition. It's an expression of an emotion opposed to a craft such as making a table or a quilt. A painting may have a gestural brushwork that directly connects us to the artist's emotion. Family relations, what makes a game a game? So a game is defined by a set of rules and pieces, a board perhaps, maybe a ball or a court. These common characteristics help us figure out what the limits of a game is. Same thing with art. Does it have paint? Is it on a canvas? Is it a sculpture made of marble? Oftentimes we can determine what a piece of art is based on other pieces that have been made similar to it. And then institutional context. Is it a piece of art just because it is in a museum, or is it a piece of art because it is in a gallery? When Van Gogh made the wheat field with crows, this was considered sort of radical, not necessarily pretty, even though these are a perfect example of popular art nowadays. Matisse's Blue Nude was very controversial for its deformed picture of the female body, not very radical anymore. Andy Goldsworthy made this gradient of leaves, resembles an abstract painting of sorts, so non-traditional materials. Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty in the Salt Lake City, Utah, and this was made by bulldozing big piles of stone and ground into a spiral sculpture, so it's earthwork. So art has a tradition of pushing the boundaries of its own different definition. Maurizio Cattelan in The Comedian 2019, Duct Tape and Banana, he presented this piece at an art fair in Miami and ended up selling it for $100,000. The banana, of course, rots, so it comes with a set of instructions as to how to install a new one in your home. Banksy made this piece and sold it for an auction. As soon as it was sold, it began to shred itself. And Pavlensky, The Scream, in 2012, it sewed his mouth shut as an artistic protest piece to the imprisonment of the punk rock group Pussy Riot. So art has many purposes. Art can be made from almost anything. Art communicates sensations, ideas, and emotions by visual means. It is a form of language. Art can help us to see the world in new ways. And the meanings vary, depend on context, culture, religion, and time in history. Let's look at 3 examples. These 3 different images of water can demonstrate how we think about art. They are from different cultures and eras. This first piece is ancient Egyptian, and it's the journey of the sun god Re, and it's a detail from the coffin of Nez-Perce in the 990 to 969 BCE. So you notice the style of it is very flat and graphic sort of looking. There's a serpent at the bottom, and this piece actually portrays the sun god Re traveling along the great ocean by day, and then he comes and defeats the serpent by night. This shows the importance of the Nile to them. And religion, most art in ancient Egypt was somehow religious based. There was a great significance with water, and artists would be commissioned to create these religious pieces on coffins or tombs. This second piece by Frederick Edwin Church also deals with water. It's a landscape painting of Niagara Falls in New York, on the border of New York and Canada. It was painted in 1857. So it's very beautifully rendered. The style and technique is realistic, but is it more than a pretty painting? In the 19th century, landscape paintings actually packed with ideology about the land. So the landscape would be a celebration of the grandeur of nature, its power, a depiction of the sublime. That's fear and awe. There's also national pride. It represents God, God's beauty and greatness. And it's also a call for expansion westward to colonize the land. There's these naturalistic tendencies, almost serving as propaganda in a way. And that can become very problematic. In this piece of art, the Condensation Cube by Hans Hocke, it's a plexiglass cube and it's filled with 1 centimeter of water. They put this in the museum, and the water will evaporate depending on how much the temperature is, how dry the room is. So opposed to it being a depiction of water, it's an actual scientific experiment in a way about the properties of water and how water reacts under certain conditions. Hans is even referencing the way that a museum will have to create a certain temperature and controlled climate to keep their artwork safe. So in the past, art has been sort of classified into a hierarchy. During the time of the Renaissance, there was a guild system. And in this guild system, you have things like painting, drawing, or sculpture were made out of workshops. And someone like Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo would take in acolytes that they would teach how to become just like them. So you would work at that, and painting and sculpture were considered the highest forms of art, and craft like woodworking, ceramics, or quilting were considered a lower form of art. Now in China, calligraphy was considered the highest form of art. That's where you combine brushwork and writing. So it's basically a combination of painting and writing together. And then the graphic arts in contemporary times have sort of been considered a lesser art, but that may be changing now. So Bronzino in 1545, he paints Eleanor of Toledo and her son Giovanni. And Bronzino would have been treasured for his skill. He was a master, and he was able to paint an incredible likeness of the sitter with realism. So he would paint this for a wealthy patron would pay him to make this beautiful depiction of his wife that he could almost hang as a trophy, a display of his wealth in a way, that he was able to hire the very best to paint his wife and child. And same thing with Leonardo da Vinci. This is a portrait of a wealthy businessman's wife, and one that he worked on for a very long time. He had the greatest representation as a portrait painter. So when he painted Lisa Giardini, this became a very famous painting. It's later stolen, and that added to its fame. So crafts like ceramic, jewelry, and weaving were always considered a lesser art. Over time, these things have sort of changed. Now, a lot of them have been amended and brought into the canon of fine art, like Harriet Power's Bible quilt from the 1800s. So in the Middle Ages, these type of quilts have been treasured for their complexity, but they would still have been considered a craft. Most recently, they've been considered fine art. This is a fine example of a piece of commercial art, the FedEx Express logo, produced by Lyndon Leader. It's a mass-produced object, but not necessarily any less of a piece of art. He did 200 concepts and many prototypes until he had the perfect expression of the concept that he wanted. Simon Rodia, an immigrant and a construction worker from Los Angeles, constructed the Watts Towers from 1921 to 1954. He made these out of steel rods, all kinds of found material, broken glass, shards, all kinds of junk. He was just an ordinary man, not an artist. And the people he lived around, this was constructed in a residential neighborhood. The people that lived around him fought to have it destroyed, but he persevered. And it's now considered an important piece of public art and a historic landmark. So maybe one of the things you can start to come to a conclusion of is that art can be anywhere. It can be in a museum or a public institution. It can be in a gallery where it's actually a market for art. It can be in your home. It can be in a public place. It can also be architecture. Here's the Louvre in Paris, probably the most famous and possibly the biggest art gallery in the world. Had come under fire at certain parts in its history for having lots of looted art. Churches, temples, and mosques have art all over them. They're basically encrusted works of art, usually celebrating their religion. This is a tea bowl. It's a ceramic piece, and from the early Edo period, 17th century Japan. This one could be an example of art in the home. We have ceramic pieces that we use. Thomas Jefferson, the rotunda, he made this in University of Virginia. It's an architectural piece of work that he designed, and he actually based this off of the Pantheon in Rome, another architectural piece of artwork. So this gets us to the point of who makes art. Creativity is instinctive. You don't have to be an artist to make art. There's cave art that was being made before art even was a word or a concept. Ancient Egypt, Angkor Wat, all these ancient civilizations had artisans that made art. Stained glass was made in the churches in the medieval period. Manuscripts, writing, the calligraphy in China. The guild system like the Renaissance, painting, sculpture, drawing. Academies that have passed down certain formal analysis as to how to make art. And then the formal, some kind of schooling, and the informal, the self-taught. All this is valid forms of people making art. Let's talk about value a little bit. There's a movie called Citizen Kane where a billionaire keeps saying the word rosebud while he's on his deathbed, and rosebud pulls him back to this memory he had as a child of his sled. So the sled had this great sentimental value to him, and Sometimes art can have sentimental value. It can have a personal meaning and value. Take Amy Sherald, who painted Michelle Obama's portrait. There's a value in a young black girl being able to see someone that looks like her in a Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery. The Gustav Klimt painting that was stolen by the Nazis. Her family worked hard to get it back because it was a family heirloom. The Salvador Mundi, that's the most expensive painting in the world at $450 million. And they're not even sure if Da Vinci actually painted it. So it has value as a commodity to be bought and sold almost like a stock. So this piece, Nocturne in Black and Gold, made by James Abbott McNeill Whistler, um, is actually a painting of fireworks, but at the time in 1875 was considered radical and one of the very first depictions of purely abstract art. Whistler there on the left considered art to be made for art's sake alone. So it could be just paint on a canvas, and it had some value just in the fact that it was art. Ruskin, who was an art critic, sued Whistler over this, uh, calling this painting a piece of art. And there was a big trial that ensued, and Whistler actually won the case, but Ruskin was only forced to pay him $1, and the trial basically ruined Whistler financially and his personal reputation. Here's a couple more pieces to get you thinking about abstraction versus objectivity. Is this is a painting of a target, but is a target an abstraction? Is it a symbol, or is it just a shape and form, or even letters or words? These letters are an abstraction, but they are painted with a shadow as if they are a three-dimensional object. Gerhard Richter, he painted photographs, and he would say that this is a representation not of a person, but a representation of a photograph. Then Jackson Pollock, who splattered paint, very emotional, energetic, painted things like this. So this would be considered totally non-objective or non-representational, the complete opposite of realism. And Mark Rothko would also be considered on that part of the scale. And Eva Hess, who did this rope piece, the string piece, is also non-objective or non-representational. Art can serve as a conscience for society in a way. During the George Floyd tragedy, this mural was created in the spot where he was killed. People bound together to create a memorial, a mural for him there. And then below we have the Ignorance is Fear, Silence is Death by Keith Haring, which is a reference to the 1980s AIDS epidemic and the covering up of it by the media. So bringing attention to that cause. Another artist famous for his role as a social activist is the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei, who has suffered for his art. In 2008, an earthquake shook southwest China, killing at least 69,000 people. Several schools collapsed due to poor construction, and Ai Weiwei criticized the government over this. He was beaten and imprisoned for 81 days. And after he was released, he fled China and was banned from ever showing there again. 5 years later, he made this six-part diorama series called Sacred, and it was presented at the Venice Biennale. It's a half-scale model of all of his time in prison. So it's a reenactment of the scenes as a half-scale model. You can see the people walking and looking in the little boxes. It has to do with surveillance, and the onlooker is assuming the role of a guard as they look through, studied his daily activities while he was in prison. So finally, we come to the point of why study art. Interpretations of art may differ based on our beliefs, our ideas, our perceptions, our biases, the place we come from, the way we were raised. But all communication has a message, and art is a form of communication. It's a language, and it's a language more powerful than the written. It's a direct communication. So to study art, you need to consider these aspects. The content. The content is made up of the subject matter, the context, and the arrangement of the visual elements and principles. So the elements and principles, the elements are made up of color, form, line, mass, shape, space, texture, time and motion, value, and volume. And the principles, balance, contrast, emphasis, focal point, pattern, proportion, rhythm, scale, unity, and variety, are the grammar and the vocabulary. And these are what we'll use to describe a piece of art. So remember, when studying art, you want to look at the three types of content: the subject matter, the context, and the arrangement of elements and principles. Now let's look at a piece of art where we can do that. This is Michelangelo's The Creation of Adam from 1512, located in the Sistine Chapel. So starting out with subject matter, we have Adam and God touching fingers. This was a depiction of an event in the book of Genesis when God is breathing life into Adam. So there's a moment of anticipation as the two men are about to touch. As far as context goes, this was commissioned by the Vatican, and they wanted Michelangelo to paint the chapel, Sistine Chapel, with all different scenes from the book of Genesis. So it was a religious commission. And as far as the arrangement of elements and principles, well, we can talk about color here. We have warm tones in the body, contrasted with cool tones behind that push the body forward. We have all kinds of complexity and color here with God and the angels and the red that surrounds him, suggesting some sort of royalty. We also have a limited color palette. It's mostly pastel colors. So it's soft, but it's also powerful on the eye. Talking about shape, we have two main shapes, this shape here and this shape here, and they're balancing each other out. This one going this way, this one going this way, balancing out with the negative space here. As far as line, we have a very precise description of the cloth here. We have a very precise description of the anatomical correctness. In the Renaissance, they were very concerned with anatomy and precision. So Michelangelo was very precise in studying that. As far as value, we have these nice gradients that make a realistic depiction of flesh and of surface. And as far as composition, we have a dynamic composition where there's a diagonal movement that takes our eyes to this center point of divine spark. So a dynamic composition, the swirling cluster here, the body reclining this way, all sort of pulling us to this center point. So that's the way that you would do a formal analysis of a piece of art. And I want you all to be able to do that by the end of this course. So thank you for tuning in and good luck with your assignments this week.